Welcome back to the class on international business communication. We covered some of the barriers to communication in the last class, and we will continue with the same topic today. So let's revise a little bit. The format remains unchanged. I expect you to come prepared for your classes. Let's first discuss why we encounter barriers in communication. I'd like you to discuss this in your class. I would also like you to discuss what the semantic barriers are to communication and how are these barriers different from other barriers to communication. What do you mean by semantics? How are these barriers different? What are the sources of these semantic barriers? Why do these occur? And what are the different kinds of semantic barriers one encounters in interpersonal interaction? After you have discussed these things, you can move on to the next part of this lecture. Today we will cover organizational barriers to communication. Now, what do we mean by organizational barriers? We have semantic barriers, which are the barriers that occur or that we encounter due to the meaning that we interpret from words. When we talk about organizational barriers, we are essentially referring to the barriers posed on communication through the interactions we have in the organizations that we work in or that we are a part of. Now, some conditions that represent common communication problems that hold organizations at low levels of effectiveness, or in other words, some conditions that cause these problems for organizational communication that eventually results in ineffectiveness in organizations are: the first one is managers have a tendency to use communication as a corrective process rather than as a preventative process. Now, what does this mean? This means that managers just cannot wait to communicate with employees until after the union is trying to reorganize a plant, for example, or they use communication as a means to sort out problems rather than to make things easier, rather than to prevent problems. So they use it as a corrective process. For example, only when there is a strike do managers or the senior management in an organization decide that they would like to call the workers and ask for their opinions. Before that, they assume that the workers are supposed to do their job and not ask questions. But after a big problem comes up and there's a strike and there's some problem in the organization, they decide, okay, let's sit and talk. Why not start with talking to people and finding out what they feel comfortable with? The other condition that results in low effectiveness in organizations is that managers take a solution orientation to communication problems rather than a causal orientation, which means that when problems come up, they try and find solutions through communication rather than looking for the reasons in the communicative process, reasons in the interaction that led to this problem. So instead of solving a strike, let's just take the example of a workers' strike. Rather than resolving the strike, if they were to just find out what in their communication caused this strike, it would make a lot more sense. And you would know this after studying communication. Managers mistake information processing for communication. After so many lectures and discussions on communication, I'm sure you've realized that communication is a lot more than transmission of messages. It is a lot more than processing of information. It is designing information, it is interpreting information, it is tagging information, it is contextually placing information. It is not just processing of information, it is not just the perception of a signal. It is the interpretation of a signal within a context and the designing of a response to that signal within a particular context with some intention some motivation, some emotion attached to it. We talked about the emotional volitional aspect of communication in the earlier lectures, and I referred to it even in the last class. And so that is what communication is. It's a lot more than exchange of information or just the simple processing of information. But what do managers do? They tend to view just the processing of information as communication, and when you ask them what is wrong with the communication, they say nothing's wrong. We send messages, we receive messages, we have a top to we have a free flow of information, which means that we send orders down the hierarchy and we get reports back up in the chain of hierarchy, and that, according to them, is the communication practice being followed in their organization. But it's a lot more than that. Why? Because human beings are involved. Because you have so many people with so many contexts, so many environments who are involved in this process. Managers do not have accurate self-concepts of their role in the communication process, and this means that they are not accurately aware of how others see them. They don't know how others perceive their role in the organization. Sometimes managers assume that since they are in that higher position of authority, they will be viewed as leaders, they will be viewed as people superior to others. That may not always be the case. Some of the subordinates may be viewing managers as facilitators. Some senior subordinates, people who are older than them in age, may be viewing managers as these youngsters who have just come and sat on their heads. Some seniors in the organization may be viewing these managers as people who can take this organization that they built with so much of care and affection to great heights. So we all view our superiors differently, and we all have different expectations from our superiors, and we communicate these expectations through formal and informal interactions, both verbal and non-verbal, with our superiors. And depending on the feedback we receive from our superiors, our relationship is established. We'll talk about communication rules and how these affect interpersonal relationships in one of the further classes. But what I want to emphasize upon is that we fail to recognize, we fail to understand how other people view us in a particular role. And that creates a problem for us as far as the communication process is concerned. I assume that I am the authority on communication, but many of you sitting in the audience, many of you listening to the lecture may have points on which you disagree with me. Fair enough. I have been put in this position, and I may get, you may assume that okay, she is a professor at IIT and she'll get offended if we question her. I won't, but maybe because of the way I talk, because of the way I look, because of the kinds of things I refer to, some of you could feel that I'm not doing my job properly. Some of you could feel that I'm just bossing around. Some of you may actually get interested in the things that I'm saying and look them up and find them to be true. Some of you may find the interpretations that I've given you not worthwhile. It's up to you. I leave it open to you. But it just depends on how you view yourself in that role, and that eventually affects the kinds of messages you end up giving back to your environment. So that is something that the managers may not have. I'm not saying do not, but then they may not have accurate self-concepts. Usually they don't. Managers do not recognize organizational communication as a functional area subject to improvement and sophistication. You must have noticed this in your studies, you must have noticed this in your classes, you must have noticed this all around. Anybody and everybody claims to be an expert in corporate communication. People call it soft skills training, they call it business communication, they call it corporate communication, they call it organizational communication. They use these terms interchangeably, and when you are in that line, very few people end up doing their PhDs in organizational communication. Why? Because it is not the in thing. Very few people end up giving the importance to communication that it deserves. What they don't realize is, and this has been demonstrated through research, I'm not saying it because I'm a professor of communication, I am saying it because this has been demonstrated through extensive research in higher education that organizational communication, communication per se in any field gets a stepchild, gets treated like a stepchild. Because people think that we have been speaking since we've been children, we have been speaking since the beginning of our lives. What is the big deal about communication? And that is why it is not even emphasized upon in the business environment. What people forget is the practical applications of communication. You may be an expert in your field, you may be the best technical mind there is in your field, but unless you are able to share your expertise with somebody, unless you are able to express your knowledge of whatever you know appropriately and adequately to people who can use that knowledge, your knowledge is of no use. And that is where training in communication comes in. So managers fail to recognize this very important skill as something that they should train their employees in. And they don't want to spend so much money on training their employees in communication skills or in giving them training in sophisticated, appropriate communication or the evolving methods of communication, and that poses a barrier to communication. Okay, we categorized organizational barriers, not we, but Lewis in 1980 in his book Organizational Communication, The Essence of Effective Management. I have the second edition of the book, and I've taken this material from that book, and in that book he has categorized the organizational barriers to communication in these 6 categories. The first one is organizational levels, and we'll go through them one by one. They're called organizational levels. The other category is faulty transmission of information, bypassing, blinderness, defensiveness, and managerial unconcern. Now let's go through these categories one by one. Organizational levels. These are the barriers posed on organizational communication because of the number of levels in an organization or the work that goes on at these levels in the organization or the perception of these levels of the organization. The first barrier here is the status relationship. Status relationship essentially refers to the barriers we face in communication as a result of our perceived status in the organization. Who am I in relation to the rest of the organization? Who's senior, who's junior, who's an expert, who's not an expert? And for the sake of clarity, these relationships have been categorized further. The first one is superior subordinate relationship. One is the actual superior subordinate. Who's at a higher level, who's at a lower level, who's getting more salary, who's getting less salary. The other category of superior subordinate relationship is the perceived superior subordinate relationship, where we understand, even if the person is not getting as much money as we are, we understand that the person is senior to us, either by way of having joined the organization earlier, or by way of having more experiences, or by way of his or her closeness to the higher ups. So that is one. The second one is the perceived expertise in a particular field. Somebody may be the junior most in the organization, but comes armed with the best possible training in a particular technical field. So the person gets a higher status, or the status, the technical status of this person is perceived as being higher than those who do not know as much about that field that this person gained expertise in. So it is all about the perceived expertise in a particular field, and this then prevents us from responding, from being open with people who are higher than us or lower than us in status, and so on and so forth. We'll talk about that in a minute. The other aspect of the status relationship is the allness versus openness to new ideas. you will find that in any organization you have Dr. Know-it-alls. You have people who know everything there is to know about everything there is to know. And they have this idea, and they will ensure that you remember that whatever they know is all there is to know. We talked about allness in the last class, and they feel that their point of view is the only point of view that exists, and they have all the information about a particular subject, and anyone who claims to have more information is either lying or making things up. They're not open to other points of view. And there are some people who are always open to new ideas, and they are considered to be people who are very malleable, people who are very moldable. You know, they can be fit into any mold, and people say, oh, well, you don't stick to your guns. Why? Because you don't have a strong opinion. So, but all these things in interpersonal communication can cause a barrier. These assumptions, these perceptions about the status, I'm not saying the actual status, I repeat, these perceptions about a person's technical status or superior subordinate status, or the quantity of information status that is afforded to a person by way of the quantity of information the person has, these things can create a problem. They can prevent us from sharing information with such people. We don't want to share information. If you know that the other person is not open to receiving new ideas or not open to receiving newer information, would you want to talk to such a person? Probably not. Even if you have some vital information to share with this person, you will hesitate. If you perceive that the person is superior to you, if the person is senior to you, you will hesitate in giving this person any information that you may have with respect to his job. And if you perceive that a person is the expert in a particular field, even if you have a deeper insight into the field, you have some new insights, you have some new ideas, you have some new experiences with a particular field, you will hesitate to share them with somebody who is considered to be an expert, because you feel that this person may either already know it, or this person may discount whatever you're saying as your ignorance or your lack of understanding, just to hide their own deficiencies or their own lack of knowledge. They'll say, well, you don't know. So we hesitate, and that prevents us from communicating freely with such people. The next one here is lack of understanding of the organization. That can prevent us from getting familiar with the organization, that can prevent us from communicating freely with people, that can also influence the way we interpret messages coming from the organization. This has further been classified into filtering of information. What happens is that, again, going back, now all of these different categories are related to each other. So a person at the top may not want to share all the information with the person at the bottom, and this has been researched and found out that all the information that the higher ups have doesn't go down to the lower rungs of the organization. So there's deliberate filtering, and this is necessary also, because how much information can you communicate? You may have some information that is required, say, for mergers and acquisitions. You are a senior VP in the organization, and you are your organization is being merged with another company, and you have been given the task to research the impact of this merger on your organization. So what will you do? You'll go and you'll find out everything there is to find out about how similar companies have handled their mergers, and how the organizational structure has changed. And so you will not want to communicate, you will not feel the need to communicate all this information to the frontline workers, because they are not concerned. They are only concerned with how their job will be affected. So why should they be given the justification of how you reached that conclusion or how you arrived at that conclusion? So there is deliberate filtering of information, and we share specific information, we categorize the information, we select the information and give it to different people in the organization depending on how we perceive their need. See, you see this complexity of communication. You see where we are coming from. We have this huge bulk of information and we take bits and pieces because we can't give it all to everybody at the same time because they have their own needs of information. So we take bits and pieces based on our perception of their need. So I am assuming where the other person is coming from. I am assuming what the other person must be thinking, must be needing from this piece of information, and then I share that information with, I select the pieces that I think the person needs and give them to him. So that is how filtering of information poses a barrier. I may not know what the other person needs. I just assume based on my experiences, I guess what the other person needs. And in this guessing process, I may lose out, I may not be able to give vital pieces of information to the other person to enable them to interpret the situation carefully or appropriately. The other issue here is tunnel vision. We put blinders, we look only in one direction. It's almost like we are going through a tunnel. We call it tunnel vision because we can't see anything outside the tunnel. It's just the road and the boundaries of the road that we can see. And so we have tunnel vision. I know the organization from my perspective. I have seen X, Y, Z in the organization. So I know that this is a typical organization. IIT is a government institute, and I have studied in government colleges and I have worked in government colleges, and so I assume that IIT is also going to be like any other government college. And when I see openness here and when I see encouragement to faculty for research, I get baffled. Why should I? But no, I have this idea in my head. No. This is a government organization, they will create problems. I can't see those problems now, but some problems are yet to come. It may not be like that. IIT is governed by a completely different set of regulations and rules, and we have a lot more flexibility as far as designing our courses and running our courses is concerned, because the faculty are chosen very, very carefully. We do have a very strict set of rules, but it may not be like a typical government organization in reality, but we assume those things. Or because government hospitals are always badly managed, I've heard X and Y and Z report about government hospitals being badly managed, so I will never go to a government hospital. We don't realize that in government hospitals, the doctors who are actually there are able to understand the needs of patients who are not able to explain their needs properly and cure those people. So, we have this tunnel vision. All government hospitals are inefficient. All government organizations are inefficient. Why? Because I've had some experiences. So, and that is what happens when we are in an organization also. I go through these experiences. I've had 5 similar experiences. So, every experience is going to be like that. Physical distance between organizational groups. Different groups of the organization may not be located conveniently from each other. They may be located in different buildings. There may not be easy communication going on between the different parts of the organization. So the actual physical distance, they may be on different floors. People don't have phones, they don't have intercom, so they can't talk to other departments. They don't have access to the LAN or the local area networks in their offices, or they are not comfortable using them to discuss things. So there is a physical distance between different organizational departments or groups, and that can cause a lack of understanding about the organization, and that can in turn influence the way we communicate within the organization and about the organization with external agencies. Another issue here is the lengthy procedural structure, and many of us might call it red tape also. We have policies and procedures because we need to maintain records. We have policies and procedures because there are legal implications of things. But Sometimes in our attempt to be very, very particular, to be very careful, to be very systematic, we forget that the length of these procedures may cause a hindrance in our understanding of the organization. I have 56 steps to go through to complete one particular process. How will I remember those 56 steps? And there are 123 steps or 123 procedures in the institute. I'm just giving you a random figure. That is not the case here. No process here is as complicated. It's a random figure that I'm giving you, and no process is as complicated as it sounds. But I'm just giving you an example. So when we have so many procedures and so many steps to every procedure, we usually take out our manuals and remember the last 2 steps and the next 5 steps and forget the rest of it. And when we've completed the next 5, then we move on to the next 5 and so on. And this is what happens. And these lengthy procedures, these complex procedures prevent us from learning enough about the organization. They prevent us from delving deep into the vision and mission of the organization because we are so busy following these procedures, trying to be accurate. And plus we feel that these procedures are the same for everybody, and so there is no need for clarification. At times you never know what may be waiting for you around the corner. It always helps to ask. So but we get so baffled by the complexity and length of these procedures that we are just too scared to ask. Okay, let's move on to physical distance between members, which is another issue here. And what happens is that within the organizational levels, sometimes people are sitting very far away from each other. They don't have the time to talk to each other. They are on separate floors, like we talked about physical distance between departments. There's also physical distance between key people in particular processes. The phone connections are not stable. They don't have a chance to get on email so often because they are out in the field doing their work. So that can create a barrier in our willingness to talk to them. Kaun jaye? Who is going to climb these 3 flights of stairs and go and ask them one question? And why should I use my cell phone for calling up somebody? I should have an intercom facility for use in the office, and I should have an intercom facility that works. So these are real problems, and that adds to the physical distance. The other issue here is specialization of tasks. We are all so busy with our work. We all have such specialized tasks that they don't really overlap with each other, and it's hard to find common ground. And so we become uncomfortable asking people for information. And one very good example of this that I've seen and been through, and that the academics here will relate to, is the PhD program. We are together up to the first year or first 2 years of our courses, and once we've finished the basic courses, then we sort of just migrate to our little islands. And in academics, we are all doing so much of specialized work. Everybody is an expert on some special thing, and these areas of specialization many times do not overlap with each other. So we rarely we do collaborate. We collaborate with people outside our own comfort zones, but that collaboration is deliberate, and we try and make a special effort to get into or move out of our comfort zones and learn something new. But the tasks are so specialized, the courses are so specialized. Even with PhD students, our areas of research become so specialized that we just sort of go on to or sort of gravitate to our own islands and move away from the main core of studies and just do our own thing. And then we forget that we actually learned how to write research papers together, and we learned research methodology together. So when we are stuck, we forget that we can always call up somebody else in another department who did the exact same course with us and seek their help or get some insights from them. Another issue here is emphasis on formal versus informal communication. In many organizations, the formal communication is very highly emphasized. There's so much of work there, so many specialized tasks, very strict hierarchy. People are always busy trying to be appropriate. What is the best way to communicate with my superior? How many times should I salute my superior? You know, when I'm walking down for my lunch, if a senior comes by, I'm the one who's supposed to salute my senior. That happens in the uniformed services. It's not wrong. I mean, it's just a different world. And so, you know, a junior is supposed to be the first one to salute the senior, and the senior is supposed to salute back. And that is a formality. And at times when you're new to the service, when it's not yet become a second nature to you, or even when you've been in the service, you could be thinking of a million things, but you need to be alert as to who has been saluting you and how many times should you salute back. And if you miss one person who saluted you and you've not saluted them back, you feel uncomfortable, and that person may feel offended. And so all these things we focus so much on procedures that we lose track of the actual communication. We may actually be very interested, very empathic towards our subordinates, but maybe sometime when we are preoccupied with something else, we may forget these things, and that may become a problem. So we are so constantly focusing so much upon these procedures that we lose track of the actual message that was supposed to be transmitted. Okay, information ownership. We tend to hog information many times. It works both ways. There are some people who don't want to give the information they have to people because they feel information is power. There are other people who feel that information should be shared, and so they are constantly giving out information, even information that doesn't belong to them, and they don't take responsibility for the information they give out. So we have these different kinds of people, and every kind of information ownership brings with it different problems. If you share too much information, you are titled or termed as gossipy. You are termed as a feeder to the grapevine. If you don't give the information, then you're termed as somebody who hogs information, and people are wary of these people. And if you are the one who's deciding how much information to share with people and what to share, what not to share, should you be friendly, should you inform people about what interests them or not, we worry constantly about how we will be perceived if we were to share a specific bit of information. So we are constantly concerned about what information to give out and what we shouldn't be giving out, and in the process we may miss out on vital sharing of information, or we may end up giving too much information, and that can change the perceptions people have about us, and that can ultimately influence the manner in which people communicate with us within the organization, and that can pose a big barrier in the communication within the organization. Next issue here in organizational communication is faulty transmission of information. And how do we transmit information incorrectly? We may use words incorrectly. We may rely on wrong words to convey a message, and this can come about especially when we are using a language that we are not very comfortable with, but we have to use it for our organizations. In the Indian context, English has a hegemony over the other native languages. For some reason, we believe that if we communicate in English, we are more professional. For the international audience, one can understand, but within India, even if two people speak the same language, when we are engaging in formal communication, we use English, even if for the rest of the time we are using our local languages. So when we translate our thoughts in our native language into English, the degeneration of coincident meanings takes place, as we had discussed 2 lectures ago, and we choose the wrong words to convey a message. The other issue here is receiver-sender deficiencies. I may not know what I'm talking about. Receiver-sender deficiencies. I may not be comfortable in the language. I may not give enough description, I may not use the right words, I may be physically not able to pronounce the words properly, I may not be able to transmit the appropriate non-verbal signals along with the words. Deliberate filtering within the organization, again, this is something that we discussed even in the case of organizational channels, levels within the organization. The filtering that happens in the organization is proportional to the number of channels of transmission and the frequency of message exchange. So, I've given the example of organizational Chinese whisper. I'll give you an idea for a game that you can play within the organization. I think I designed it, but if somebody else has seen this game elsewhere, please let me know and I will give it adequate reference. But when I came up with this game, I didn't read any books. It just occurred to me that I could try this out in the organization. And what I did was, you start with a message. You divide the entire class into 6 or 7 layers of hierarchy. So you have vice presidents, you have the CEO, you have senior VPs, you have the junior VPs, you have the directors, you have the senior managers, middle managers, junior managers, frontline supervisors and frontline workers. Divide up the organization, assign 2 or 3 or 4 students to each level, and start sending a change message about organizational change. Maybe the organization is moving, the company is moving from physically moving from, say, Delhi to Bombay, or something like that, some message containing some form of organizational change message in it. And so the CEO communicates it to the senior VPs, the senior VPs say to the junior VPs, and everybody else is outside the classroom. So they read this complicated message that you've given them, and they say it to these people who come into the class, the next level of hierarchy. And when you reach the last 2 layers, what happens typically in an organization is that we have people who are always eavesdropping on other people. So what I typically do is send out one student into the corridor, and ask the student to fire up the other people. And I say that, there's some whispering going on behind closed doors in your organization and something is not right and we are not being told. And so this person goes and instigates the last 2 layers, and when the message comes down, you can see that there is some deliberate filtering and some additions are coming on, and something is being added, something is being deleted, and by the time it reaches the lowermost layer of the organization, the message has completely changed. We've played Chinese whisper. Many of us have played Chinese whisper in our childhood, where we all sit in one circle and we whisper one sentence into one person's ear, and the sentence goes around, and by the time it comes to the last person, the sentence has completely been changed. And so this is one game that you can play that can help you understand this concept. So the more number of channels there are, the more the message will be filtered and modified, and of course that becomes a barrier in communication. Bypassing is when someone is dropped from or ignored in the organizational change. Now I have listed a whole bunch of things here that Lewis has provided, and the situations when people bypass their colleagues are, and I'll just read them out from here. So let's just focus on the slide. We talked about bypassing in the last class, but this is different. This is when you deliberately leave somebody out of a conversation. And why do you do that? When it is necessary to get things done faster, when it is easier to instruct the operator than to train the supervisor, when there is an emergency, when the supervisor tries to corral more responsibility, when an employee has excessive ambition to get ahead by fair means or foul, when supervisors are so hard to deal with they invite being bypassed by superiors or subordinates, when the supervisor has differences with another supervisor on the same level and bypasses him or her to avoid contact, when misunderstanding exists between supervisor and subordinate and the subordinate goes to the supervisor's boss to tell the story, when the channel jumper, the person who has jumped the channel, wants to punish or discipline the person jumped, when the subordinates feel that they are being held back by their supervisor or their abilities being overlooked, when subordinates are afraid of some specific action by their immediate supervisor, when subordinates feel that their supervisor is either overcritical or unfair, when subordinates feel that their supervisor is not doing the job or making the right decisions, when the superior feels that the subordinate is not carrying out instructions, when the superior lacks confidence in the subordinate's ability, when the entire organization has fallen into the habit of channel jumping, when the jumper is ignorant of chain of command, protocol or procedure, when position specifications, job descriptions and organization charts are so muddled that the lines of authority are not clear, when a superior steps in to issue orders or to correct difficulties during the subordinate's absence. These are some of the situations in which people may end up bypassing others in the organization. Another issue is blinderedness. You know, blinders, when horses are given these little things on the side to make sure that they focus only on the road ahead of them. So these are called blinders, and this results in tunnel vision, and they can only see the road in front of them and nothing around them, and everything around them could be going haywire, but they just sort of stay on the path. And it's a term coined by William V. Haney, and the manager who appears to be wearing blinders is prevented from seeing more than one way of doing something. Just like a horse wearing blinders sees only the path that he or she is on, and follows the path that he or she has been trained to follow. Similarly, the manager who's perceived to be wearing blinders sees only one aspect, one side of the situation, one way of doing things in the organization. Now, I have an interesting exercise for you here, some examples of blinderedness. I have two exercises for you over here, and we'll just focus on this. The first one is, I would like you to try to connect these 9 dots by drawing 4 straight lines. And how do you do that? So what you do is, I'll let you figure this out on your own, and I would like your teacher to pause for a second and let the students try this on their own, and I will do it for you, and I will show you how. What is our tendency? We'll say, okay, maybe these 3 can be connected, these can be connected, but how do I connect all 9? Maybe you've done it in some class on creative writing, or in some class on creative thinking or something. So I'll just show you how this can be done. What you do is, this is what you do. You draw a line. I'll take a thicker pen here. So you draw a line from here to here, and then you draw a line from, okay, so this line needs to be longer, slightly longer, okay, and then you make a line from here okay, this can be one line, this is the second line, this comes all the way down to here, and you draw the third line, and of course no lines should overlap. So this is the third line. The dots are connected, but you're going out of the dots. Just see what is being done here. And this is the fourth line. And so we are going out of our comfort zones and doing something. Okay, so this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and this is 4. And so all dots are connected, and you have 4 lines connecting these dots. Another very interesting exercise can be, just look at this shape. It's a square, and there are 9 squares, right? You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9 squares. Now you need to reduce these 9 squares by removing 8 lines. How will you do it? Think about it for a minute and I'll tell you. You remove this, and I'll take a different colored pen here. Maybe I'll take red. So this is 1. You remove this. This is 2. You remove this. This is 3. Remove this. This is 4. Remove this. Remove this. Remove this and remove this. You've removed 8 lines and you are left with the outer square and square number 5. And these lines sort of, this is 1 square and then you have the bigger square, this one right here. I'm sorry, my lines are not straight. So this is an example of blindedness. We tend to think, we keep thinking, how will I reach this conclusion? Similar thing happens when we are trying to solve problems in any organization, and we need to start looking for things out of the ordinary. We need to start thinking outside the box. Okay, defensiveness is another issue, another barrier to organizational communication. Defensiveness is an act of protecting one's own views. It may present a somewhat hostile environment, in hostile emotional state of mind. When we say we are defensive, I'm fiercely protecting my own views, I'm fiercely defending my point of view, and when I say defending, I wear this armor and I'm like, let whatever is come my way and I'll deal with it and I'll fight back. That is defensiveness. And when we say we are defensive, the word defensive essentially has a negative connotation. It connotes emotional aggressiveness and anger and just this wall that we push people out of. The causes to defensiveness are a challenge to our own self-image. We feel that our self-image, our self-concept is somehow our sense of identity that we talked about in one of the previous lectures is being challenged or is being hurt by somebody. One more cause for this is the inability of most people to tolerate differences in others. We think that people are the same, they think exactly like us, they have the same biases, they have the same training, they have the same principles and value systems and all of that, and we have a hard time tolerating these differences in people, and that can result in defensiveness. Some defensive climates, some things that can cause defensiveness in people are, one is evaluation. We talked about the tendency to evaluate in one of the previous classes. The other issue is control, which is somebody trying to tell you that whatever you're doing is not right. You must do things a certain way. When somebody says and forces you to do things a certain way, it is implied in that conversation, it is implied in that message. It is implicit in all attempts to alter another person is the assumption of the change agent that the person to be altered is inadequate, which means that whatever you are doing is not right. That is why you need to change. People will say, no, you're doing it right, but I can tell you something better. Which means that you feel, what is this? I mean, once, yes, improvement, we are all open to improvement, we are all open to change. But at some point, I may be doing something right. But when a person is constantly telling you to change, some person is constantly trying to control things, do things a certain way, follow this procedure and none other, you feel, why should I not use my own brain? Something similar to this was a dialogue in the movie Fashion. I don't know, by the time you all watch this, Fashion is a Hindi movie that was screened a few years ago, and in that movie there was a dialogue in which it's about modeling and the fashion industry, and one of the models says we are all treated like hangers. We are not supposed to think. There is an episode in which Priyanka Chopra tries to wear the dress in another manner, in a manner different than the one the designer had intended. And the designer shouts at her and asks her to get out, and her colleagues then end up saying that we are just treated like hangers. So that is control. Now strategy is manipulation. When we talk about manipulation, we are essentially talking about somebody trying to go behind our back and doing things in a not so ethical manner. Neutrality is detachment. Many times what managers do is they are neutral to the environment, they detach themselves, they have a couldn't care less attitude, and that can create a defensive climate. What is this? Why doesn't so and so care about us? Superiority is the perception of superiority of some members over others. We feel that we are more our value system is better than others, we know things better, we are experts, we are better people, better human beings than others. And certainty is this constant need to always be right. Yes, we need to do things efficiently, but at some point we need to draw a line and say it's okay to be not right all the times. I need to explore other options. But when there's this constant need and constant climate, constant environment of you having to be right at all times, it can create a defensiveness in the employees, and that can prevent them from opening up about their problems, their issues, and so on and so forth. Okay, managerial unconcern is another one, and the causes, unconcern means lack of concern. The causes for this are, one is failure to transmit messages because managers assume everyone knows, or messages are just not going in the direction they are intended for because managers assume everybody knows what is being done. Managers are lazy or tend to procrastinate, put things off for a later time. Managers don't want to let go of the information they have. They feel that information is power, so they don't share this information. Organizational culture does not encourage and facilitate optimum quality and quantity of two-way communication. This is what I was referring to in the beginning of the lecture, where I said people say, oh, we have a perfect system of organizational communication. Messages go up and they go down, and reports come back to us, orders go down the hierarchy. So that is not really an optimal two-way communication. Preoccupation is a high volume of intrapersonal communication. I'm constantly thinking of something else is going on in my mind at all times. So when somebody sends me a message, somebody tries to talk to me, somebody writes to me, I have a hard time interpreting whatever they're saying because there's so much going on in my mind. I'm preoccupied, I'm thinking about something else all the time. Mind wandering is what happens? Poor attention span. This is what happens when you are forced to sit through a lecture, 1 hour long lecture on communication barriers, and your minds must be wandering right now, and you must be waiting for this lecture to finish, and it's just a few minutes more. So that is a limited attention span. Okay. Some cures. Status relationship. We talked about problems coming up because we perceive people at a different status than us. The status relationship problem can be overcome by creating an atmosphere of communicative approval in the organization so that messages are not in constant competition upward and downward. We can approve, we can encourage people to talk about themselves, we can encourage people to ignore the status and hierarchy and discuss things freely. The lack of understanding issue can be dealt with by enhancing interaction, encouraging interaction among various work groups, and the roles of employees can be clearly defined. You have more informal meetings and stuff. Specialization of tasks can be changed, can be dealt with by encouraging open and participative decision making. You encourage more and more people to contribute to the decision, and training across specializations, encouraging more people to be trained in other kinds of areas may help as well. Information ownership is instilling pride in group work and a demonstration of the need for accomplishment by cooperation with other members of the organization. So you make them feel good about whatever they do. Faulty transmission of messages can be dealt with by reducing the number of levels within the organization, which may or may not be possible always. It can also be dealt with by encouraging employees to take notes on what is said and then confirming the information they have received. So you repeat whatever they have noted down. You use audio-visual aids and give them periodic reinforcements of key messages, and you can deliberately slow down the instruction giving in the process to let the information sink in. Bypassing reasons may be discovered by asking 3 questions. Why was I bypassed by my subordinate or superior? Does my being bypassed indicate that I am not handling my job properly? What must I do to prevent bypassing from recurring? And blindedness, and so all these things can help us deal with bypassing. Blindedness can be dealt with by accepting and appreciating other people's point of view. Defensiveness can be dealt with by creating supportive climates. And how can you do this? One is description, which is non-judgmental behavior, creating this environment of non-judgmental behavior, not judging people. Problem orientation, you communicate a desire to collaborate in defining a mutual problem and in seeking its solution rather than forcing everything down people's throats. Spontaneity, which means non-manipulation. You're not constantly planning things ahead of time, you're spontaneously reacting to situations, and that can create a supportive climate in the organization. Empathy, thinking in the other person's shoes. Equality as opposed to a strictly hierarchical system. And provisionalism, which is the willingness to accept and experiment with different behaviors, attitudes, beliefs and ideas. Even on your own, you want to figure out what is going on and you want to experiment with different ideas and belief systems, etc. Preoccupation can be dealt with by actively reducing the amount of intrapersonal communication, actively removing the intrapersonal noise in our minds to allow for interpersonal communication. I'm thinking of lesser things so I can talk more with people. Mind wandering can be dealt with by realizing the significance of being attentive to one's work and colleagues and actively focusing on the messages being received. So instead of thinking of this and that, we just focus on the matter at hand. Now some more barriers to communication are social barriers, etc. We'll deal with these next time, but for now I want you to discuss and reflect on a few things. I would like you to reflect on the organizational problems you may have faced due to the problems with communication in your organization. And I also want you to discuss in your class how you can resolve and minimize these problems based on what you know about organizational communication. And we'll finish this class on organizational communication barriers next time. Thank you.